With that, we will move on to a discussion on a sector which is one of the fastest growing sectors in Sri Lanka, and that is tourism. We have recorded over 1.6 million tourists visiting us up until October 2016 for this year, and that is a 14% growth in this sector compared to the volumes in 2015. To get into a detailed discussion on this sector, we have with us Travis Gomez from Frontline Research. We warmly welcome you on board, and a very good evening to you.
Good evening.
Yes, let's start off the discussion from talking about how we have been performing over the past 10 months, because we have a target of achieving 2.2 million tourists by the end of this year, expecting a growth of 26%. Can we achieve this target? Where do we stand?
So in terms of the government's target, I think it was initially 2.2 million, but I think even recently, I think they are thinking of revising it up even, given there's been very strong growth in terms of the tourist arrivals. So there was a bit of a slowdown when it came to the in the month of May, because of the flooding that took place. So because of that, there was some there were some travel warnings that were given. As a result, there was some cancellation. So there was a drop during that quarter. But if you look at the last quarter, the September quarter, there's been a pickup in that, and actually we are experiencing one of the fastest growth. So in terms of the target, it's quite achievable. And in terms of the performance of the hotels also, it has kind of followed that trend.
In terms of performance of the hotels, the average room rate was increased by 15% compared to last year, but we still see a 66% flat rate in terms of occupancy. Why is it? Is it that we are on excess capacity in terms of room inventory?
So it's a combination of different things. So one is that a lot of the existing hotels have been in order to meet this growth, they have been expanding their capacity. At the same time, I think even more than that, the informal sector, that is sort of you have basically these people are basically converting their homes into small resorts, or these also with these technologies like Airbnb. There's basically more capacity coming online because of that. So that's basically exerting a lot of competition to some of the more traditional hotel properties that you see.
Do we have any programs aiming at community-based tourism?
That is what they're looking at, because especially when you have this rapid growth in tourism, some of the issues that you face is basically you might come into conflict, or you have to do it in a kind of a more sustainable manner. So if you take some of the areas where some of the new areas where they're going into tourism, in terms of places like Hikkadua. So what they've seen is that there might be there's been some disruptions with the fishermen there, who basically their livelihood is being affected. So you have to kind of do it in a way that is kind of sustainable. So at the same time, when it comes to our rainforests and all, you have to do it in a way that is kind of protecting the environment at the same time. Because if you look at what's happened in the experience of countries in the Caribbean in the 1980s and all, basically they were also very much promoting themselves as beach resorts. But what happened was basically they wasted the environment was not paid enough attention. So because of that, what happened was basically their tourism started to stagnate, and actually their arrivals started to decline. So we must basically avoid falling into that trap.
Talking about sustainability, it is very important that we ensure sustainability in tourism sector. What are the measures we have taken to ensure sustainability?
So in general, being more mindful when it comes to beach properties and heritage properties, and when it comes to forests and all, there has been some steps taken. But more than that, I think also in order to make the tourism sector as a whole more sustainable, we must kind of move away from sort of attracting the seasonal tourists, the traditional tourists from the European markets, so as a result of that, our tourist industry becomes very seasonal. So typically in the June quarter tends to be the weaker quarter. And so because of that, what a lot of hotels have been focusing on, and what the tourism ministry has also been trying to focus on, is to try to diversify that. So basically attract more people from Asia, from the region, as well as from the Middle East. So that is a key factor. So if you take tourists coming from that region, their requirements might be different. So you kind of have to cater to that. You have to see what sort of areas we need to invest in to attract more tourists from there.
Okay, as per the proposed budget, the minimum room rate was removed. What do you think would be the impact on this sector through this move?
So it has been kind of like a controversial issue for some areas. So I think when it comes to the formal hotels, the main hotel chains, I think they're happy about that, because I think what they feel is that this is like a main reason why they could not compete, because you had more people from the informal sector. You had also some of these apartments that were being converted into hotels or like given out as hotel rooms, that they were not able to compete with that. So they see this removal of the room rate actually a positive thing for them.
And also, increasing average daily expenditure of tourists up to $200 is one of the key strategies of Sri Lanka tourism. How do you think we can tap this market? How can we attract the high-spending travelers to Sri Lanka?
Yeah, so that really, again, it comes down to this diversification, basically moving away from Sri Lanka as just sort of like this beach resort destination. So, I mean, the strategy that was taken under, say, the former regime or the former government was to basically, they were focusing a lot on kind of developing the infrastructure, especially in Colombo, where you had like these shopping malls coming up and these proposals of casinos and things like that. But the thing was, with that strategy would have required a lot of investments, and something that the country would not have been able to sustain without having a lot of like foreign investments coming in. And also that's something that is, in order for a strategy like that to succeed, we'd basically have to get a lot of investments, and we're also competing with the likes of like the Singapore and Dubai. So it's kind of something difficult to do. So instead of that, what we really should be focusing on, in line with the whole megapolis project and all that, where we're trying to make Colombo sort of like this hub, is to basically improve on the cultural aspect, because we have like a rich culture. So there's a lot of like, basically spending on basically museums, on art exhibitions, on, improving that aspect. Making Colombo a very attractive tourist destination is one way to really improve the tourist spending, because basically if you have more people in Colombo, there's much more activities, more restaurants would benefit, the hotels would benefit. So that's like one way to actually sustainably increase this tourism spend.
Okay. In terms of revision of tax, corporate tax from 12% to 28% in tourism sector, as per the proposed budget, what would you think would be the impact regarding investments?
So I guess the government's thinking with regard to taxing, with increasing the taxes, that they have basically identified sort of like the sectors that are doing well from the high growth sector. So if you take like construction as well as tourism, they basically increase the corporate tax rate for that. So from a sort of like from a macroeconomic point of view, it was a good thing that they did, or at least this was like a reasonable thing to do. But in terms of supply, I don't think at the moment we would have an issue, because there's already a lot of supply coming online. So I don't think it will, maybe most probably the formal hotel companies, they might maybe like revise their plans, or they might not go for as big an expansion. But at the same time, another proposal that was brought in the budget was to basically give some incentive for hotels that are more than 10 years old to refurbish their properties. So basically they're kind of going for a strategy of more quality rather than quantity of hotels. So that's a good thing in a way, to basically improve the value addition of the hotels.
Okay. What are the developments in hotel sector these days in terms of supporting tourism sector?
Well, again, the focus, if you take the Tourism Development Authority as well, it's very much, it comes down to really the branding aspect of Sri Lanka. So that's, I think, an area that they're focusing on a lot, that it goes beyond just the traditional stuff. So a lot of the push is with regard to that. And also with the budget also, again, is to try to make Sri Lanka more like a cultural destination. So one of the proposals in the budget was to basically have like a cultural show every day of the year. So that, and then plus like in Christmas you have like these Christmas festivals, and during Vesak you have these festivals, basically to have more like activities of that sort of thing to attract tourists based on that, because that's really what the tourists are really looking for. It's more like experiential tourists rather than just the environment.
Talking about branding, how do we brand Sri Lanka globally? How do we take Sri Lanka beyond sun and sand and attract tourists?
That again, it comes down to the investments that we can do, and to show the world that we have much more to offer. So Sri Lanka has that advantage in terms of we're a small country, but we have like a large diversity in terms of the biodiversity, as well as in terms of the type of activities you can do. So you have both the beach, you have the heritage, the hill type of environment, and then you have the rainforest. So you have that whole mix of different kind of activities that you can do in like a small environment. So in order to do that, again, one thing you really need to support is really building up the infrastructure, having good road connectivity, having domestic air travel. That's one way to really show that, okay, within a few number of days, you can do all of these activities. So really branding Sri Lanka as like this full package sort of destination that you can go to.
Actually, we have a scarcity in terms of professionally trained staff in this sector. How do we address this issue?
That was also something that was identified in this year's budget. So they specifically identified like the tourism sector, the construction sector. So the government is giving some incentives basically for people who are interested in like training schemes or vocational training in this area, to give them some incentive to kind of go for this. And they're also like encouraging a lot of the firms, the large firms, to basically develop their own like training programs and to improve their skills, because that is like an area that at the moment that a lot of hotel companies, that has been one of their main issues. That's also one of the reasons that has been like driving up their costs, which is like affected their performance to a certain extent.
Okay. Local trends in tourism have been always challenged by the global trends. So what are the global trends we see in tourism sector?
Global trends again is that basically people are becoming much more mindful of the environment, so they are not so the sort of tourism that they're really interested in is sort of more experiential. So they're not really as a result, they're moving away from like the typical like the standard type of hotels that you have, moving more towards this type of outdoor, with more like outdoor type of activities, or this kind of like adventure sports type of activities. So they are moving more towards that like experiential tourism, and that's also what some of the hotel properties here have also been geared more towards doing that thing, like promoting things like surfing and like this sort of like kite surfing, that type of activities, varied activities is what they're really looking for.
Okay, where can we see tourism sector going in year 2017?
So it will continue to develop on this trend, and it's so I think we can. So I think last year I think we achieved like USD about 3 billion in terms of the performance of the overall contribution of the sector. So I think that trend would continue. So I think in 2016 they're expecting about 3.5 billion. So I think the prospects still remain quite positive with regard to this segment. And there's much more to go. If you take a lot of other countries in terms of the contribution of the tourism sector as a percentage of GDP, it's much higher than the level that we are at the moment. So there's a lot of scope for us to really develop in this area.
Can you also elaborate on the open sky policy, which will contribute immensely towards tourism sector development?
So again, this is very much in line with basically the government's vision, and which is something we really need to do, is basically to move away from just the traditional European type of tourists that are coming here and basically diversify. So this open skies policy will really help that to basically attract more tourists from India, from China, from the Middle East. So that would also be quite supportive of basically the tourism industry, and that would also make us less vulnerable to the seasonal fluctuations.
Okay, what are the key challenges we see in this sector as a whole?
So one is in terms of pretty much this oversupply, and so at the moment I think the sort of like the contention as well, a lot of the hotel properties, is that the informal sector is a sector that has really benefited, and they kind of have like and their main contention is that they sort of have like a tax advantage because they don't have to pay the tourism development levy, or they don't have all these licensing issues. So because of that, they kind of have an undue advantage. So the budget also has tried to like address that. So one thing they did was the tourism development levy, they have put it on smaller hotels, like hotels that are earning less than 12 million. So the government's, I think the direction is to try to level the playing field and make it more competitive, while at the same time make it more sustainable for all of the players in the industry.
Right. Thank you very much, Travis, for joining us and sharing your knowledge.